Why were you interested in writing about how hard it is at times to open a door?
So I think people ask me a lot if Meredith is based on me, and she's not. I've never gone to the extremes of shutting myself away from the world for all that time. But I am a person who needs her own space, who needs that quiet alone time from the rest of the world. And I don't get that very often because I'm now a single mum of 3 children. So it's very rare that the house is quiet, and I do have that kind of headspace. But I think over the last few years, I've really embraced that side of me, that introverted side. And I've realized that being that kind of person, even though that's only one aspect of anybody's self,
right,
so many positives to that. And I think when I grew up here in Scotland, I was a quiet, shy girl. But I never felt like that was a positive thing. I feel like being labelled shy when I was growing up in the 80s and then a teenager in the 90s, it wasn't something to celebrate. And it was kind of like something I felt I maybe had to make an excuse for, or maybe had to hide or try to mask, which is hard. You know, it puts a lot of pressure on you if you're trying to basically be something you're not and try and fit into this mold of, you know, I guess a more extroverted, out there character. So I was thinking about all that kind of stuff, and the idea of being alone versus loneliness. And I think they're 2 very different things. I think you can be alone physically like Meredith is, but not be lonely. And I'm not saying that Meredith wasn't or isn't lonely, but I know in my life, I honestly think the loneliest times I've had have been when I've been in a relationship, where I've been surrounded by people all the time, but I've just been incredibly lonely. And on the other side, the times where I felt, sometimes where I felt really happy and content and alive are when I've been alone. So I had all that in my head at the time when I started to write the book, which was in October 2019. So it was a long time before COVID. And that's another thing. People ask me all the time whether this was inspired by COVID, but it really wasn't. Meredith came first. But yeah, I had all these themes in my head. And then this character she just popped into my head one day. And at that point, she was just a woman who lived alone in Glasgow and hadn't left her house for a very long time. And I was really intrigued by that idea, and I didn't know where it was going to go. I didn't know if it was maybe going to be a more sinister novel, more of a thriller or a suspense. But as I started to write the character of Meredith, I realised that it wasn't going to be that kind of book, that it was going to be an emotional story, that it was going to be character driven. And basically the process of writing for me, I don't really plan ahead much when I write. So I really did figure out Meredith's backstory and then her future as I was writing the book. And that's how she came about. So she's got a very special place in my heart because I do feel like there are a lot of similarities between us, even though she's not based on me.
Well, as a reader, I grew very attached to Meredith, I must tell you, and I felt exactly the same, that you cannot equal, in her case, being alone and being lonely. It's a very complex concept, and actually you approach these very difficult subjects, actually, in a very vivid, relatable, palatable tone. What is your recipe?
I mean, as I said, I don't plan when I write, and so I don't have a recipe. I do, and you know, a lot of times I've just submitted the second draft of book 2, which will be published next year here in the UK.
That's great news.
Yeah, it's great news, but it was hard. It was hard, and a lot of times when I'm sitting, late at night when my kids are in bed and I'm desperately trying to get those words out, I wish I was a planner. I wish I had spreadsheets and post-it notes. Like I see a lot of other authors, they have this system, and I think it's just the way my brain works. It doesn't work for me, but I wish it did. So I guess my only recipe really is just it's not a recipe, but it's just a rule I have for myself. And no matter how difficult I'm finding it, I just have to keep writing and write my way through the problems and the unknowns. And eventually I get to that point. I really like to, it sounds a bit airy-fairy, but I like to let my characters develop almost in their own terms and take me where they're going to go. And I mean, I've only had one book published so far, but it did work out in the end. But it can be quite a stressful process.
Well, I find your dynamic to be perfect. So I hope it's less stress and more satisfaction in the future, because this one turned out excellent. And you wrote this very dynamic book about a character who is actually homebound. And you have such a skillful treatment of time. I mean, it's very powerful in your novel, because there's this constant tension. So it appears to me that there's a constant tension between the days that Meredith counts, the days in which she's inside, and inward time, actually, the way in which she actually perceives time. Was that your intention, to create a tension between inner time and outward projection?
Yeah, I think so. But also, as the novel was in the early stages and we were going through different drafts with my editors, I did think about maybe switching that structure up towards the end of the novel. And it's hard to talk about without giving anything away.
Right, yes, no spoilers.
So yeah, I don't really know how to finish that answer now that I've said that. I don't want to spoil anything, but I did want to give the sense that it really is a count. It's counting up, I guess. It's not counting down. Meredith, she's very aware of how long she's been in this situation. But I think really, and I think it applies to all sorts of trauma and, people who are in recovery from all sorts of different things. We've all had really difficult times and we all have to find our own way of getting out of it. And obviously what Meredith does is pretty extreme. I don't personally know many people who've just shut their front door and not left the house for over 3 years, but that's what she does, and she has to figure out a way to then make a change and to let the outside world in. But I did want to, I wanted that to be a message in the book, that recovery looks different for everyone. And you can't really put a timeline on it. And I've had my own issues with mental health throughout my life. And it's only been quite recently that I've realised that I'm never going to get to the end of that recovery journey. It's a lifelong process. So you don't get to day 1000 whatever, and then, you're fixed and everything's fine and you're recovered and you're healed, because life's hard and life's always going to throw difficult things at us. And I guess, it can take a lifetime just to really feel like you're, I hate the phrase living your best life so often, but I think you know what I mean. Just really to get to a place of acceptance of yourself and to let go of guilt and just try to be comfortable and happy, and for that to look like what it has to look like for you, and it's different for everyone.
I'm very glad you mentioned trauma, because your portrayal of trauma, of the forms it takes, of the relationship it models, is very evocative, and it has the reader constantly thinking of the people next door, actually, of the ones who need help at times, of the fact that we all need help at times. Was that your intention?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with Meredith has gone through she's had a very, very difficult childhood, and those issues from her childhood are still very present when we meet her in the book. And
yes.
Then she had this horrific traumatic experience that really was that's what really put her in this situation. I think it was really, in fact, in the very early drafts of the novel, the way that trauma and her backstory, her childhood, her upbringing, the way I depicted that, it was even harsher than it is in the finished version. And it was actually my agent who suggested that I just tone it down a little bit, because this woman, this relatively young woman, she's gone through so much, and I think in the first draft she'd gone through even more, and my agent said, listen, you can't put her through all this. It's far too much for one person, and it might be more difficult for the reader to find those moments of lightness and hope in the novel. I wanted to give a balance between the trauma and how that's portrayed, and I didn't want to shy away from it, but I didn't want it to make the whole book just really bleak and dark and depressing. I wanted there to be that thread of hope, and I think the way I thought was a good way to achieve that balance was through Meredith's character, because obviously she has mental health issues and she has gone through some horrendous experiences, but that's only one part of her. And the fact that she's basically self-isolating for this long time, that's only one part of her as well. Even though that's at the heart of the novel and that's what the book is about, that isn't what defines her. And I think, again, that goes for all of us. We're all complex humans and we're the sum of so many parts. And I wanted Meredith to be funny and bright and interested in people, and she's a great friend, she's supportive, she's all of those things, and she finds joy in her life when she's still effectively self-isolating. She's not miserable all the time. She does have moments of real loneliness and moments of sadness, and obviously moments where she has to confront her past, whether that's with her therapist or other means. But she can also find great comfort and joy in the life she has when we first meet her. And I think that's how that was really the key for me to have that balance in the book and not let it get too dark.
Well, I think you achieved a very good balance, and I think we do perceive her as very generous and warm, and as you said, a very good friend. Indeed, somebody who is always there for others and who maybe stops expecting at some point for people to be there for her. Yeah. As we were discussing earlier, we won't give too much spoilers for the ones who haven't yet read the book, which I hope will happen. But I was wondering, what's the most interesting feedback you got from your readers?
I've had a couple of interesting questions about the book. Obviously, I've mentioned that people ask a lot whether Meredith was inspired by my experience during the pandemic. And I did start to write the book several months before we first went into lockdown here in the UK. And it's funny, actually, I just still find it very surreal that I was writing about this woman who was isolating, albeit, of her own choice, I guess. And she was doing jigsaws and she was baking cakes and she was finding connections online. And then 6 months later, I was doing jigsaws with my kids, and I did do some baking, but I'm a terrible baker. I don't have the skill there. So that was very short-lived. But yeah, it's funny what people pick up on. People have asked why she's called Meredith and pointed out that that's not a Scottish name. But I'm called Claire and that's not a Scottish name either. So, the name just came to me, that was her name from the very start. But I think in general, the feedback, and I don't read reviews because I just can't. It's just, it sends me into a bit of a spiral if it's not positive. And obviously, there's no one book that everybody loves, and I understand that. But I think for a debut author, everything's so new, and I think you can get into a dangerous cycle of reading reviews and just becoming a bit obsessed with it. But obviously, readers contact me on Instagram, and I've actually been quite surprised myself by how much lots of people have connected to this character. And that's just the best feedback I could ever hope for. That's really what matters. The fact that Meredith has touched someone so much that they feel that they want to reach out to me and send me a message. That's just amazing. It makes it all worthwhile. And just makes me want to keep going and write more books.
Well, I'm very happy that is the case, because indeed you wrote this extraordinary book about mental health, actually, and the toll it takes on our lives. But you also wrote a book about reaching out, ultimately, about hope. You were talking about the first draft and the fact that you tuned it down a little bit, but I think you did make people reach out and feel like the character in the book is maybe not about you, but about them. Did you expect that?
I didn't expect anything, because I just didn't know what was going to happen. But I really hoped that would be the response from a lot of readers. So it's amazing that that's happened, because when you put a book out into the world, that's really, you lose control of it. I can control the writing of it, and my publisher controls other aspects of it. But once it's out there and it's on readers' Kindles or in their hands, it's out of my hands. It's out of my hands and it's in their hands. And that can be really scary. So I didn't expect anything, but I've been just blown away by the generally just overwhelmingly positive feedback.
Yes, well, you said you don't read reviews, and I won't share more if you don't allow it, but I did read some reviews in preparing for this interview. And it's amazing how people actually talk about how much this book has helped them, because indeed the pandemic did come and isolation happened in one way or another to all of us, and mental health was affected. It was always a factor in this isolating process. And people were actually helped by the book, by Meredith, and by the way in which she overcomes, let's say, the cliche of always being lonely when you are alone. So I think it's a very powerful statement, and indeed a huge, I wouldn't say compliment, but it's a very good thing that came out of your writing. And I was wondering, what do you do when you don't write? Because this thing is definitely turning out very well. I don't know about your baking, but writing is definitely a big plus.
Yeah, baking's terrible. I'm not so good at jigsaws either. Well, as I said before, I'm a single mum. I've got 3 children. I've got 2 dogs. So life's pretty hectic. In fact, 2 minutes before I came online to you, I was dropping my youngest daughter at nursery. My oldest, my son, he's 15. He's got his first exam today. So after this,
good luck. Lots of luck. Yeah,
I'll be
fingers
telling
crossed.
him to do, get in the zone, and then I'll be taking him to school for his exam. So really, when I do have free time, that's when I write. But I live near the beach. I love water. I love to just get near the sea and just really spend time with friends. I mean, I live I'm not far from Glasgow, where Meredith lives. It's only a short drive away, but it's a small seaside town, so it is a very small community here. And just really the simple things I really enjoy, and I think that's something that I took from the pandemic. I think, as I said, I do love to socialize, and I've got lots of great friends, and I love to spend time with them when I can, but I do love my alone time. And I think the pandemic, and probably also the process of writing the book and then editing the book during lockdowns, it made me think differently about that pressure that I think so many of us feel to be out there and to be always socializing and doing this. And I think social media adds to that pressure, because everyone looks like they're living their best lives online, and it's all about parties and where you are. And, and I just realized that I think when you're faced with that kind of huge global crisis, you really look at what's important, and that's your family and your friends and doing what's right for you. So I came out of that feeling far less pressure to socialize and to say yes to things that really deep down I just knew were not what I wanted to do.
Yes.
So it is, it's a pretty quiet, simple life here, but I love it.
Well, this is a wonderful answer, and it was a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for it. I have one last question for you. It's not actually a question, it's more of an exercise. Now imagine you're having a cup of tea and a slice of Victoria cake with Meredith. What would she say to you?
Oh my goodness. She'd probably say, let's get back in that kitchen. I'll show you how to bake. Let's do a jigsaw. You're going to sit until it's done. I don't have the patience for things like that at all. Do you know what? I think Meredith, being Meredith, she would just say, what's going on with you? How are you feeling? Talk to me. Because that's the kind of woman she is. And I think she would just give me that space, and over our cake and maybe a difficult jigsaw, we would have a chat. And I really miss her, actually. I felt when I've been writing this second book, it took me a while to get into it and really try and forget about Meredith. I felt like I was cheating on her because I was exploring these new characters. And she's made a huge impact on me, for sure.
Thank you so very much for your time, and have a nice day today. Good luck with your book, and best of luck to your son today with his exam.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I just want to say thank you to everyone in Romania who's bought the book, and I hope they love it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.